Nerd Problems Gaming here. In today's video, we'll be going through the top 20 best two-player board games, so let's get into it. Now, a couple things before we jump into the video. Obviously, there are hundreds of different board games out there, so I certainly haven't played every single one available, but I do have a pretty big collection, and so these are 20 of my favorite two-player games. I also tried to include games from a lot of different genres, so some of them might be more simple games to pick up and play, others get more complex and are very strategy-based. And throughout this video, I'll really just dive into my review and general overview of the game and my thoughts on it. But if you want more of an in-depth review and how to play video on each of these games, that is available on our channel. And I'll also include a link below the video to a blog post of ours that goes into more detail on each game individually. And if you want to pick up a copy of any of these games, there'll be a link in that blog post as well to do so. But if there are any great two-player games that aren't on this list that are some of your favorites, definitely let me know in the comments below. I'm always excited to check out new fun board games that are worth playing. But with that said, let's jump into the video. Alright, so the first game on the list is Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. And so this is a cooperative deck building game where players will take on the role of various different Harry Potter characters and progress through the multiple school years in the Harry Potter stories. And so a lot of the characters and items come right from the book and right from the movies. All of the artwork is pulled out of the movies as well. So if you're a fan of those, you'll definitely enjoy this. But basically how the game works is you'll pick a character, be it Harry Potter, Hermione, Neville, Ron. And if you get some of the expansions, you can even play as Ginny or Luna. And so each character is going to have their set base deck of cards consisting of a couple different items and some basic spells. And your goal is to take on the various different Death Eaters and villains from the Harry Potter universe throughout each year. And so you'll use these base deck of cards to purchase new items, new spells and abilities, and acquire new allies to join your team to improve your deck further, to allow you to gain more money, and to get lightning bolts that you can use against the various different villains from the Harry Potter universe. And so you'll team up and work cooperatively to take out these villains, and it's a whole lot of fun. The replay value is incredibly high throughout this game. As you progress through each year, it's totally different and progressively gets more and more challenging. So basically, as you start to get familiar with the game and learn the rules, it becomes more clear to develop your strategy. And like I said, you can play this game with 2 players, you can play with more as well. But it's a cooperative game, so it's really fun if you like working together. And if you like the Harry Potter universe, it's a lot of fun as well. There are a ton of different expansions for the game as well. So if you like this base game, there are a lot of expansions to add new elements from, again, the books and the movies that you might enjoy. But overall, this is definitely one of my favorite games of all time. It's great playing as a 2-player game, and I definitely recommend it. But let me know in the comments below if you've played this game before, if you like deck building games. I would definitely recommend checking this out, as it's one of my favorites. Alright, so the next game on the list is Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, Defense Against the Dark Arts. So this is kind of a similar game to the last one we talked about, but the key difference with this is that it's a competitive deck building game. So it's going to be you versus another player, and then this one is strictly a 2-player game. But how it works, again, you'll start with a base deck of cards that you will have to work from. And the general concept of the game is that you are competing against each other in a wizard duel. And so you'll have a board across the middle that tracks your health tracker. And basically you'll gather items, spells, and abilities and allies, eventually with the goal of trying to stun your opponent in a total of 3 different times. And so the game can go back and forth between players, where you might win 2 games in a row, stunning them, but then again, the next round, they come back and win 3 in a row, so it can get pretty intense going back and forth with the game. But another neat feature with this is that your deck continues to build and improve even after you're stunned. So basically, once a player is stunned, the game kind of resets, you put your pieces back to the middle, starting the duel again, but now you have your further improved deck that you've built up to this point. So again, you can really come from behind and win, even after a couple losses in a row, because maybe your strategy was more of the long-term game versus the short-term game. And so it's really fun. You never really know who's going to win until the last hand is played. And so again, if you like the Harry Potter universe, I would definitely recommend this. It's a fun deck building game. It doesn't take a ton of time to play. You're maybe looking at like 45 minutes to an hour. Again, maybe even shorter if one person happens to win the first 3 games in a row. It's definitely simple to learn, it's easy to play, and if you like deck building games and Harry Potter but want to have more of a competitive aspect, unlike the last game, Hogwarts Battle we talked about, I would definitely recommend this. But let me know in the comments below if you played this one before. If there are other games like this, I would definitely want to check those out. But either way, I would definitely recommend Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Alright, the next game on the list is Evolution. And so this is a survival-based game where players will try and create different animal species with various different traits with the goal of trying to get the most food by the end of the game. And so when you start off the game, each player is going to have one species that they're working with, and they have a limited population size and a small body size. But over time, you're going to gather more cards and add traits to these species. And so again, it might turn them into a carnivore, it might give them the ability to gather food more effectively. And each turn, you also have the chance to add a new species to your group of species, increase their body size, increase their population. And so it's pretty strategic as you play, but it's also very simple to learn. And so the artwork in the game is really great too. It's very colorful, as you can see from the front cover here, but all of the cards and artwork are a ton of fun. It's great for the whole family, and every gameplay experience is totally different. I feel like the game has a really high replay value because, again, depending on the traits that come out that you draw, what the other player is doing could totally alter your strategy as you go along. Where starting off, you might be competing for plant resources in the middle and need to develop your different species accordingly. However, halfway through the game, you might swap one of your creatures to become a carnivore, which leads you to attack the other player, and if their defenses aren't prepared, you could overwhelm them that way. Or again, you might be placed in the opposite situation where you need to prepare against an oncoming carnivore attack, which you weren't prepared for up to that point. So again, the game can really swing back and forth, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great two-player game, and I definitely recommend it. There's also some different expansions for the game as well, so if you like this base game, there's even more fun to be had. But let me know in the comments below if you've played Evolution before, what you think about it, but I definitely recommend it as one of my favorite two-player games. Alright, the next game on the list is Ticket to Ride. And so this is a fun, family-friendly game where players will take on the role of old college friends that have a bet going on to see who can travel to the most cities by rail in just 7 days. And the person that goes to the most places is going to win $1 million. So that's the general idea of the game, but the gameplay is pretty simple, where players will draw various different train car cards and try and match different color sets, and then use those to play trains across the board from various different locations. And so the winner of the game is the person that gets the most points at the end of the game, and so you'll earn points by playing different rails across the city. There's also destination cards, which are kind of little challenges where you might need to build a train from, say, San Francisco to New York, or Los Angeles to Ottawa, Canada. And the list kind of goes on and on. So there's various different cards like that that you can play to earn extra points, but it's kind of a press your luck mechanic as well, where you maybe would draw a card and you get extra points if you are to complete that route, but you'll lose those points if you aren't able to do it. And so it's a lot of fun. You can play from 2 players up to 5 players, but I really like the 2-player version of the game. It's challenging and competitive, and often you'll be competing against the other players to get the same route. The replay value is incredibly high as it's a different experience every time. You might try different strategies, you might have different destination cards you're going for, but overall it's a lot of fun. It's easy to learn, it's family friendly, and most games would take between like 30 minutes to an hour, so it's not a long time to play. But overall, it's definitely one of my favorite 2-player games, and I recommend it. But let me know in the comments below if you played Ticket to Ride. I know there's a ton of expansions out there for this game. Is the base game your favorite or one of the expansions? Let me know in the comments below. But if you haven't played Ticket to Ride yet and you're looking for a great 2-player game, I definitely recommend it. Alright, the next game on the list is Pandemic. And so this is another fun cooperative game where players will take on the role of various different heroes that have unique abilities that can allow them to prevent the world's destruction from an ongoing pandemic. And so as you'll play, you'll have to work together with other players to move across the board and to stop a virus pandemic outbreak happening across the world. And so you'll again need to strategically work together to use your abilities to remove viruses from locations, build sets of cards to eliminate viruses in total, and it's definitely a lot of fun. It's strategic, but also simple to play. I think the game has a really high replay value as well, because again, you never really know how the outbreak is going to spread across the world. Again, there's a lot of different roles you can play throughout the game, which alter your play style and will force you to develop new strategies each time you play. The game is probably going to take about 45 minutes to an hour to play, so it doesn't take a long time. And it's also one of my favorite 2-player games. This is another game that has a ton of different expansions. So if you really like this base game, you might want to check out some of the many other games. There's even a legacy version, which is a totally unique experience when you play. But it's certainly one of my favorite 2-player games, and if you haven't played Pandemic yet, I definitely recommend it. But let me know in the comments below if you've played this game before, if you like some of the expansions, let me know what those are in the comments below. But I would definitely recommend Pandemic as one of the best 2-player games out there. Alright, the next game on the list is Ghostbusters the board game. And so this is a Ghostbusters themed dungeon crawling game where players will go through various different scenarios from the Ghostbusters universe, taking on ghosts and saving the world. And so it's kind of a dungeon crawler RPG set in the Ghostbusters universe. So if you're a fan of the Ghostbusters, I think you'll definitely like this. It also dives into some of the lore from the Ghostbusters comics as well. And so throughout the game, if you get the base game, you'll be able to choose from the main Ghostbusters to play as. But if you get some of the expansions or the deluxe version of the game, you can play as other heroes from the Ghostbusters universe and the comics as well. And so each Ghostbuster will kind of have their own unique abilities that they can use. And as you play and capture ghosts, your Ghostbusters will gain more experience to unlock new abilities and more moves they can use to capture ghosts and clear the levels. And so the basics of the game is there will be different scenarios that you'll go through. So maybe you'll have a 4-part campaign where you're trying to capture Slimer, and you'll go through the various different maps with the Ecto-1 and the Ghostbusters, and you'll need to capture ghosts and close spirit gates that are releasing ghosts into the world. And so every time you play, there's a bunch of different scenarios you can go through, but I think each time you go through it can be a totally unique experience. And so the game, you can play 1 to 4 players, but I think it works really well as a 2-player game. And so in that mode, you could have one player play as 1 Ghostbuster, another playing as 3, or each player could take on the role of 2 Ghostbusters to take on the different challenges and scenarios throughout the game. I also think the replay value is incredibly high. Like I said, each experience is a totally new playthrough, but there's also even random scenario generators online where it can randomize a map for you, randomize how the ghost comes out, randomize the type of gates there are, and how you clear the level, and much more. I even found myself building my own custom scenarios throughout this game, and it's one of my favorite board games of all time. Maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan, but I think the base game is a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend it. It's also great for 2 players as well. But let me know in the comments below if you've played this game before, if you've made any of your own scenarios like me. I'd love to chat about it more with you in the comments below. Alright, the next game on the list is Zombicide. And so this is kind of similar to the Ghostbusters game, but it's set in a zombie apocalypse universe. And so you'll combine forces with a bunch of different playable characters, each with their own unique abilities, to take on various different scenarios in attempts to survive the zombie apocalypse. And so if you like dice rolling, this is definitely a game for you, as you'll gather many types of different weapons, and often you'll be rolling 4, 5, and 6 dice at a time, trying to take out the hordes of zombies in the challenging scenarios. The gameplay is pretty long in this game, where many of the scenarios will take 45 minutes to even up to a couple hours, so definitely be prepared for that going in. And it can be a little complex as well, but I think the game does an awesome job really capturing the feeling of being overwhelmed during a zombie apocalypse. Because as you go through the various different maps, trying to complete the scenarios, you'll open new areas, and when you do that, new zombie hordes will spawn every single round. And as your players level up and get stronger, so will the zombies and monsters that are spawned. On top of that, as you make noise by using various weapons, or breaking down doors, or even just being gathered together, it will attract the zombies from across the board. And so again, you start off, it's pretty simple. Your characters will be on lower levels, and so will the zombies. But again, as you progress, things get more and more intense. But eventually, there will be dozens of zombies all across the board. You'll be surrounded, and you'll need to try and get to safety from many of these scenarios. If you like this base game, there are so many different expansions to the game as well. There's a 2nd edition that's come out. There's a Black Plague version, which kind of takes place in medieval magic-like times, but this is more of a current day zombie outbreak, and it's a lot of fun. If you like zombie games, if you like dungeon crawlers, I definitely recommend Zombicide. It's one of my favorite 2-player board games and favorite board games in general. But let me know in the comments below if you played Zombicide before, which expansion is your favorite? Do you like the modern day version or the Black Plague version? Let me know in the comments below. But if you like zombie games and dungeon crawlers, I definitely recommend this. Alright, the next game on the list is Boss Monster. And so this is a great 2-player 2-player game, but you can play it with more players as well. But the general idea and concept of the game, instead of being a side-scrolling video game where you're playing as the hero and taking on the evil boss at the end of the stage, in this game it turns it on its head where you're actually playing as the boss monster and you're trying to create the best dungeon to kill as many heroes as possible and to be the first player to reach 10 souls by killing off heroes in your dungeon. And so the game has a great sense of humor, it's really funny, and it has a bunch of nerd references and references to classic video games. So I think if you're into that kind of stuff, you'll definitely like this game as well. The game is pretty simple to learn and it doesn't take that long to play. A game session is probably going to take about 30 minutes, give or take, depending on the number of players you're playing with. But I really think the game has a lot of replay value because it's a totally different experience every time you play. So to start off, there's a bunch of different boss monsters to choose from, and so this is randomly dealt out to players. And then on top of that, there's a bunch of different types of cards you can add to your dungeon to take out the different kinds of heroes. And so there's trap cards, there's monster cards, there's basic rooms, advanced rooms that do more damage to heroes, there's spell cards you can use from your hand that help you out or that can sabotage other players. On top of that, there's a bunch of different hero types that you're going to try and attract to your dungeon. So depending on the dungeon that you build, you might attract certain types of heroes. So again, depending on the type of dungeon you're building, you might be attracting the same type of heroes as the other player, or they might be a totally different set. And so again, you have to weigh the pros and cons of that while building your dungeons, and your strategy can change on a moment's notice depending on the heroes that come up and what other players are doing. But I think the gameplay is really addicting, it's super easy to learn and quick to play. It has great replay value, and there's a bunch of different expansions to the game as well. You can certainly get started with this base game, but many of the expansions are also standalone versions, or can be combined with the base game as well. Overall, if you like retro gaming and are looking for a competitive 2-player game that's easy to learn and fast to play and has addicting gameplay, I definitely recommend Boss Monster. Alright, the next game on the list is D&D Dungeon Mayhem. And so you can start with this base game, but there's also a couple different expansions like the Monster Madness expansion. But basically how the game works, it's a very simplified version of Dungeons & Dragons, and it's basically a hero versus hero battle royale. And so when you start off the game, you'll choose a hero or monster to play from if you get one of the expansions. And each one has kind of their own unique play style and special ability in the game. And so the game starts off, the gameplay itself is very simple. It's just really drawing a card and playing a card. But at the same time, it can really get intense while you're doing that. Some cards will add to your character's defense and block incoming attacks. Others will be swords that will damage the player. Others will heal your character. And others might be a special ability that allow you to take multiple turns in a row and play multiple cards, and many combinations of that as well. And so each experience can get pretty intense, but the gameplay overall is incredibly fast. Most games take about 15 minutes, give or take, but with all the different characters to choose from, especially if you add in the expansions, it gets to be a lot of fun. It's very easy to learn. I think it's great for the whole family. If you're into fantasy and dungeon crawling and Dungeons and Dragons, but want an extreme simplified version of that, I definitely recommend D&D Dungeon Mayhem. It's definitely become one of my favorite 2-player games, and I highly recommend it. Alright, the next game on the list is Monopoly Deal. And so being in the board game space for a long time and having lots of board games and playing lots of board games, I've steadily found myself going away from playing the base game Monopoly. It's not necessarily one of my favorite games anymore, especially when it can take hours to play. But Monopoly Deal really simplifies the gameplay where players will be drawing cards and trying to get a set of 3 Monopolies to win the game. And so it's way faster to play than your base Monopoly game. I think it can get a lot more strategic. And again, you'll be playing cards to gain new properties, gathering money, collecting rent from other players. And it's really just a streamlined Monopoly experience, and in my opinion is a lot more fun. So if you enjoyed Monopoly growing up as a kid, or even if you enjoy it today, or maybe you've gotten away from it like I have over the years, I would definitely recommend checking out Monopoly Deal. It's a ton of fun as a 2-player game, and it scales well for more players beyond that. It's also super cheap. In most cases you can get it for under $10, but if you like fast-paced card games, I definitely recommend it. Alright, the next game on the list is Dominion. And so Dominion is a deck building game where players will try and create the best kingdom and win the game with the most victory points. So again, how you play this game is very simple. You'll start with a base deck of 10 cards. Some are victory points and others are copper that you can use to buy new cards. And so again, players will compete against each other to gain the most victory points by the end of the game. But there's so many different ways to do that. which is why I really like this game, as it has an incredibly high replay value. So again, the game is very simple to learn. You'll just simply play the cards from your hand, and you'll use those coins and cards to take additional actions, to purchase new cards from the market, and to use those abilities to gain more victory points. And so the game will end once players have cleared 3 of the piles or the 6-point victory point pile. And what's really neat is that the game comes with a bunch of different types of cards, and so you'll start the game by laying out 10 of them, but each game you can randomize it so those 10 sets of cards are different every time you play. And so again, your strategy might be something like trying to gather a lot of gold or high value cards right away so you can buy even better cards. Other strategies might allow you to play a bunch of cards on your turn instead of just one, or to draw a bunch of cards to increase your money that way. The possibilities are virtually endless. And so it's quick to learn, it's easy to play. Most games will probably take you around 30 to 40 minutes to play. It plays great as a 2-player game and scales well beyond that. On top of that, there are tons of expansions for Dominion, and all of them can incorporate with this base game, or they can work as their own standalone game. So I'd recommend getting started with this base game just to try it out and see if you like it. But again, the possibilities and replay value are endless as you add on new expansions to the game as well. Overall, if you like deck building games and you want a family-friendly version that's quick to play and easy to learn that has an incredibly high replay value, I definitely recommend checking out Dominion. Alright, the next game on the list is Harry Potter Death Eaters Rising. And so in this game, you'll play as various different characters from the Harry Potter universe, taking on Voldemort and the Death Eaters to try and stop their evil plans. And so this is a dice building game that functions kind of similar to a deck building game, but you'll start off with a base character, and then over time you'll roll dice and use those to acquire new characters and to attack Death Eaters and eventually Voldemort to try and save the world. And so each one of your characters will have health points associated with it, and you'll work cooperatively with the other player to try and take down Voldemort and the Death Eaters. And so the game is very difficult, I'll certainly say that. It can be incredibly challenging to win, but it's extremely satisfying when you do, because you'll certainly play a lot of games where you'll get pretty far in the game and likely end up losing against the Death Eaters and Voldemort. So I think if you're a Harry Potter fan, you'll definitely enjoy this game. If you like dice rolling and deck building concepts, this game is a ton of fun as well. Now for me, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, but if you're maybe not a Harry Potter fan, there's a ton of different Rising games in this series that you can pick and choose from, just to fit the theme that you maybe like better than Harry Potter, if Harry Potter isn't your thing. So for example, there's like a Star Wars one, there's a Batman themed one, there's even a SpongeBob themed Rising game, and much more. So if you like dice building, I would recommend checking out this game or one of the many other Rising games in the series based on the theme that you like best. I think they all play great, but Harry Potter Death Eaters Rising is one of my favorite 2-player games, and I certainly recommend it. Alright, the next game on the list is the Hero Realms deck building game. So again, this is another deck building game that I really enjoy. It takes place in a fantasy setting, and you'll try and gather wealth and power in this fantasy city and to defeat the other players in the game. And so players will have a set amount of health throughout the game, and your goal is to defeat them and bring that down to nothing. And to do so, you'll need to start with a base deck of cards and slowly expand that over time to make your deck more powerful, to help yourself gain more wealth, to accumulate new cards, to deal damage to the opponent, summon creatures to protect yourself, and much more. The game also kind of has a Magic the Gathering type feel to it, as it was created by some former Magic the Gathering champions. But at the same time, you don't need to deal with mana resource management or getting cards to summon other cards. It's just basically, if you have the gold to buy it, you add it to your deck, and you're able to play it that way moving forward. It also is neat though, because a lot of the cards will work together in conjunction if they're the same type. So you maybe have some different wild cards like the green color that can work together. If you play multiple cards like that in a row from your hand, you might get additional bonuses that way. And so again, you can strategically build your deck by trying to combine colors, using the same ones together, or just choosing the best cards that you like. So the replay value of the game is incredibly high. Games themselves don't really take that long to play either. You're probably looking at 20 to 30 minutes per session, maybe even faster depending on how well you build your deck each time. But again, it's totally random how the cards will come out from the store and how you build your deck each gameplay session. So the replay value is incredibly high. And if you like fantasy settings, if you like deck building games, I definitely recommend checking out the Hero Realms deck building game. It's one of my favorite 2-player games, and I highly recommend it. Alright, the next game on the list is Duffers, a golf-inspired deck building game. So again, another deck building game. You might tell this is one of my favorite genres, but this is another really cool concept that really puts you in the mind of playing a golf game against other players. And so in this game, you'll start out with some basic clubs and a set of holes you're trying to complete. And so you'll need to upgrade your clubs over time, acquire new putters, and get new equipment and even coaches to help you throughout the game to complete the holes in a fewer number of turns than your opponent. And so again, the game has a high replay value for sure because every experience is totally different as you play the game. On top of that, there's beginner holes, there are advanced holes, you can mix and match. You can play a game with less holes on the table, you can play a longer game with more. You can challenge yourself by using more advanced holes versus beginner holes, and the possibilities are really endless. And so I think a lot of deck building games are maybe like fantasy based or sci-fi based, and there's certainly nothing wrong with those. Some of those are my favorites, but it's cool to see kind of more of a real world example in deck building, and it really feels like you're playing golf as you go through this game. It's family friendly, it's simple to learn, it's highly addicting, and I definitely recommend Duffers, the golf-inspired deck building game. Alright, the next game on the list is Clank, a deck building adventure. And so this is a fun concept that combines deck building with a board game. And so you're going to take on the role of various different thieves trying to get the most treasure and to escape an evil dungeon beneath the kingdom that's guarded by a fire-breathing dragon. And so again, players will compete against each other to get the most treasure and make it out alive. And so there's kind of two layers to the game. There's a safer above ground level throughout the castle, but then there's a depths level with many different branching paths and different options you can choose to gather treasure and again, try and make it out alive. And so throughout the game, you'll start with a base deck that will give you different movement, ability to do damage to monsters throughout the dungeon, or to get skill to buy new cards and alter your deck even further. And so it's a whole lot of fun. There's a ton of different strategies to the game. Again, you can maybe try and get in and out quickly and sabotage other players where they might not even make it out alive, or you can try and press your luck and stay in the dungeon longer to gather more treasure, and again, try and make it out alive. But as you travel throughout the dungeon, you'll steadily make more noise or clank and have to put it in a bag, and occasionally the fire-breathing dragon hidden in the dungeon will attack. And so this is pretty intense, but you'll shake up the bag, draw out cubes, and if you happen to draw your own, you'll deal damage to yourself, or again, you can draw on other players to deal damage to them, and you never really know what's coming. And so again, maybe you're trying to progress quickly to get treasure and get in and out. Other times you might press your luck further, but then you end up making a lot of noise, which could threaten your life from the evil fire-breathing dragon, and the possibilities are really endless. The game can take around 30 to 60 minutes to play. Again, typically longer if you add more than 2 players, but it's a great 2-player experience. The replay value is incredibly high. Every time you go through, you can go with a different strategy. You'll build a new deck. On top of that, there's 2 different sides to the board, a more beginner-based side and more advanced side. And it's a whole lot of fun. There's several different expansions to the game, and this game is more of a fantasy-based theme, but there's also Clank in Space, which is more of a sci-fi theme as well. Both play great. It's just kind of a personal preference, I feel like, whether you want the fantasy experience or maybe the sci-fi experience. But I'm a huge fan of the fantasy-based one and the original Clank, a deck building adventure, and I definitely recommend it. It's one of my favorite deck building games, one of my favorite 2-player games, and if you haven't played it, I would recommend checking it out. Alright, the next game on the list is Everdell. And so this is a fun fantasy game where you take on the role of a group of woodland creatures trying to build a city and gather resources to prepare for the upcoming winter. And so in this game, it's considered a worker placement game. And so you'll have various different workers that you'll place across the board to gather resources, buy and play new cards from the community meadow or from your hand, to build up your city, which can in turn gather more resources to prepare for winter, and the player with the most points at the end of the game will win. And so the game starts off pretty simple where you just have a couple workers to place around the board and gather resources, but eventually you have several workers, multiple locations in your city, many critters giving you resources and new abilities, and the strategy can get incredibly intense as you play the game. I definitely think the theme is family friendly, playing as these woodland creatures trying to build this city and gather resources, and so it is simple to play, but the overall strategy can get pretty intense. I routinely find myself planning out multiple turns in a row and having to rework my strategy in the moment depending on what the other player might do and the cards that come up. I think the replay value is incredibly high in the game as well, as you'll shuffle out different starting forest cards which give you various new options on how to collect resources. There's different event cards that come up every game. The cards that come up in the meadow and in your hand are different, so how you build out and play your city is different every time. And like I said, your strategy is ever evolving as you play. The game probably takes about an hour to play, give or take, depending on how familiar you are with the game. But overall, I've had a blast with this game. It really turned me on to the worker placement style gameplay in general. It has great artwork, it's incredibly addicting, it has an extremely high replay value. There's additional expansions you can get if you like this base game. The 2-player game plays great, it scales well to more players above that, and I highly recommend it. Alright, so the next game on the list is Star Realms. And so this is a sci-fi based deck building game from the makers of Hero Realms. And so it has a similar feel to it, but this time you're in space, trying to build space armadas and fleets and star bases and to take on other players to be the last faction standing. And so it has a similar feel to Hero Realms like I talked about before, but in this case you're building starships, bases to protect yourself, and gathering gold to buy new ships and upgrade your armada. Similar to Hero Realms as well, there's different factions and card types that you can build up and play. So some of them are more aggressive, others are more defensive, and other combinations as well. Your strategy is going to change every time you play the game. New cards will come up in the market that you can buy from. You'll have to anticipate and build your armada to counteract what your opponent is doing. It's quick to play. It's probably going to take you about 20 minutes, give or take, to play each game. It's great for 2 players and I highly recommend it. So if you like deck building games and want to check out one in a sci-fi setting, I definitely recommend Star Realms. There's a ton of different expansions as well, so not only does this base game have a lot of replay value, it can go even further as you add in additional expansions. Alright, the next game on the list is Ghostbusters Blackout, where you play as the Ghostbusters that are trying to capture ghosts that have all escaped the containment unit after a blackout throughout New York. And so pulling from the Ghostbusters comics, you'll be able to play as the main Ghostbusters, but as well as several from the Ghostbusters comics, and team up to capture the ghosts across the city. And so each one of the Ghostbusters will have unique abilities and skill sets to use, and each one will also have their own set of dice to play as. And so there's multiple different colors of dice, and ghosts will be scattered across New York, and you'll need to go out and work together to capture them. And so again, if you're playing a 2-player game, each player will control 2 Ghostbusters, and you'll need to move your Ghostbusters across the different boroughs and capture the ghosts before the city is overwhelmed by chaos. And so each round, the chaos meter will steadily increase, but you can prevent that from happening by capturing ghosts, buying new equipment to improve your Ghostbusters, and saving the city. And so it's a lot of fun. I think the difficulty can swing from time to time depending on what ghosts come out as you play. Sometimes you might get a great combination where you get weak ghosts at once. Other times you might start off and some of the hardest ones all come out at once. So it can have different difficulty spikes depending on the cards that come out, but this also adds to the replay value of the game as well. There's options to modify the game to make it easier or more challenging depending on your familiarity with the game or how hard of an experience you want, but I think the game has an incredibly high replay value. It's fun getting to work cooperatively with the other player because again, some ghosts will require you to use multiple different colors, which means different players controlling different Ghostbusters will have to work together. There's lots of different strategies you can take on the ghosts, and the order you choose can really matter depending on what strategy you're going for, and I really enjoy this game. It's pretty simple to learn. It doesn't take that long to play. Most games will probably take around 30 to 45 minutes. It has great artwork from the Ghostbusters comics, and it's a whole lot of fun. And if you like dice building like games and working cooperatively, I highly recommend it. Alright, the next game on the list is Tavern Masters. And so this is a fun, unique concept where you play as a tavern owner trying to save your city from orcs that are trying to overrun the city. And the way you're going to do that is by winning the Best Tavern Award and using your prize money to bribe the orcs to go away and save your city. And so the gameplay has a unique fantasy concept, but again, it's a lot of fun and has several different deck building elements to it as well. It's not technically a deck builder, but it has a lot of those elements and high replay value like those type of games. And so as players will start off, they'll have a few base cards, and they'll need to steadily build out what's available in their tavern to attract the most patrons and to get the most gold. And so the first player to get to 20 gold will win the game, and you're going to need to do that by adding new drinks to your bar, hiring new staff members like waitresses, bards and singers, and much more, including unique food types in your bar and games like darts and much more. And so each round you'll be able to build out your bar and attract new patrons, which will give you gold. And depending on what's in your bar, some of those patrons might come for just a one-time visit to give you gold. But if you have the right elements in your bar that they really like, they'll stick around long term and increase your gold coming in and profits every single turn. Each game is a totally unique experience, and your strategy can evolve as you play. Gameplay sessions are pretty quick and usually take around 20 to 30 minutes. And if you like this base game, there's a bunch of different expansions you can get as well to further add to the game. It's a fun concept where you're building a successful tavern. The artwork is great, the replay value is incredibly high, and I definitely recommend it. Alright, the last game on today's list is The Few and Cursed. So this is a deck building, board game, RPG adventure that's based on a series of comics that take place in a post-apocalyptic world where most of the world's water has evaporated and disappeared, and you're playing in the desert of the now Pacific Ocean in more of a dark Wild West bounty hunting adventure. And so you'll take on various different monsters and creatures, and you'll play as a variety of different bounty hunters, each with their own unique abilities and decks. Players will start with their base deck of cards and characters, and so each player will choose a unique character that has their own unique set of stats like health, curse thresholds, and amount of bullets they can carry. But as you play the game, you can increase those numbers, build a more powerful deck, take on unique jobs to gain money and victory points, and explore the land taking on the various cursed bounties. And so one thing that I really like about this game is the fact that there's a bunch of different modes to it. You can play a cooperative mode, you can play a competitive mode, there's a solo mode to the game, but it plays really fun as a two-player game, and I think that's what I like best about it. Now, I'll certainly say the game is not a simple game. It really has a high learning curve, but once you get the hang of it, it's a whole lot of fun, and the replay value is incredible. Most games will probably take you between 2 to 3 hours, so it's not a fast game again to play. But if you want a more strategic experience, if you like deck building, if you like board games where you're exploring and also having more of an RPG element, I definitely recommend it. It's fun to go out and hunt the various different cursed monsters, and even your players can become cursed as you play through the game. This will make them more powerful, but also usually hinders them in some way, so you have to go through the delicate balance of playing as your character as normal or letting them become cursed, with some downsides, but also making them more powerful. Since the game is based on a comic series, the artwork is really great, the components in the game are super high quality, and the strategy is ever evolving as you play, and each gameplay session is a totally unique experience. There's a bunch of different ways to win and earn victory points, and like I said, you can play it competitively, you can play it cooperatively, and it's a whole lot of fun. But if you like strategy board games, if you like RPGs and deck building and the Wild West theme, this has all of that combined into one, and I definitely recommend it. But overall, guys, that wraps up my list of the top 20 best two-player games. Let me know in the comments below if there's any I missed on this list or any that you recommend I should play, and let me know about your thoughts on the games I listed here today. Again, if you want a more detailed explanation of how to play and an in-depth review on these games, we have videos available on our channel for that, and there'll also be a link in the description below to one of our blog posts where we do cover each game in more detail. There'll also be links where you can pick up the games if you want to check any of these out. But if you guys like this video, be sure to smash that like button as it really helps out the channel. And if you like videos like this on video games, board games, and everything nerdy, check out one of our other videos here, and be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notifications to get the latest updates of new nerd videos we put out. But once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you more soon.